On this week's episode of Whitetail Cribs, we're stopping in Michigan to visit John Eberhart. John has 51 Pope and Young whitetails in the record books and 30 that come from the state of Michigan. Get ready to see the former Michigan state record, a world record steelhead, and his full whitetail collection at J Sporting Goods. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave us a comment and subscribe to the channel.
Well, good morning and welcome. My name's John Eberhart. How are you doing? Welcome to my abode. And I think we had discussed what we were going to do a little bit today, and we're going to go down in the basement and look at some deer pictures, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff. Kind of a weird little thing the way this door opens up, so we have to come around the stairwell to get into the basement, into my dungeon. Actually, this is my man cave. There's some of my arrows, some of my fishing line. I buy fishing line in the bulk spools. I used to rep for Berkeley. I forgot to mention that. I've been a sales rep in the hunting industry for about 30 years, and I used to be a buyer for Michigan's largest sporting goods store back in the 70s. I was the archery buyer. And back here, this is where I keep my scent lock, my insulated garments, my rainwear, Rivers West. All these bags here are airtight. The totes are all airtight. And as you can see, there's some over here. And I like to store everything in airtight containers so it doesn't get any odors on them whatsoever. And everything here is taken care of. It's, all of the waterproof stuff or insulated garments, they're washed in scent-free detergent, thrown in a dryer. And even on that stuff, as soon as it comes out of the dryer, they go in their own airtight tote. The scent lock I do not wash. I just deabsorb it in the dryer, and then it goes in an airtight tote. And I've got multiple suits for different weather conditions. Now we're going to go back out here into my man cave. There's a few of my fishing rods over here to the side. I guess I should come over here and show it to you. I used to build custom rods back in the 70s, steelhead rods primarily. And, like that's one with a custom butt wrap on it. And most of these other rods are walleye, bass, trout. I like to have rods ready so if I'm going to go pike fishing or bass fishing or walleye fishing or steelhead fishing, I don't have to change lines, I don't have to change spools. I just grab the rods that are for that particular species and I just go. I don't have to change stuff around because that just takes a lot of time. And I guess I should come this way. These are some of the fish I've had mounted. That's a male steelhead. That was a 17-pounder. This here was a world record, caught in 1981. It was a line class record. That was an 18-pound, 2-ounce steelhead caught on 4-pound test line. And that's 4-pound tournament line. So that would be like 2-pound trilene. 2-pound trilene tests out at about 4.6 pounds. So the criteria on a 4-pound line class record is the line can't test over 4.7 pounds. 4-pound test trilene or Maxima would test out at 7 or 8 pounds. So it has to be tournament line. And that's a pike my wife caught right here on our lake. And that's 43 inches, northern pike. A couple turkeys. This one here was a Rio. Bass was caught here on the lake, a smallie. There's a small largemouth. I caught that years ago back in the 70s when my kids were little. And at the time it was the biggest one, and they were all with me when I caught it, so I thought it'd be cool to have it mounted. In fact, right here's a really cool picture. That's a picture of that bass with all 4 of my kids, and one of my sons has his fist down the bass's mouth. So I thought that was a pretty cool picture. And then that's a walleye. These are 3 bucks that I met my wife on a blind date. Only blind date I've ever been on in my life. And when I walked in her living room, she had those 3 deer heads on the wall. And that would have been 1985. So it was love at first sight. And so I thought, because she hunted with me for about 5 or 6 years, and when you're hunting with your spouse, we hunted at totally different levels. So for those 5 or 6 years, I really didn't kill much as far as trophy animals because I was always catering to her, getting her in her tree, prepping everything for her. So that definitely affected what I killed for those years. And then she kind of got out of hunting, and then I started killing stuff again. But anyway, those were her 3 deer heads that she had on the wall before we ever met. And then while she was bow hunting with me, I think she shot five bucks, and they were all 1.5 years. Maybe one of them was a 2.5. And there's my daughters. Oh, and here are some animals. I had these animals mounted because they were up in Jay's Sporting Goods up in Clare, Michigan. And they have a 200-seat seminar room called the Outback Room. And so I had these on the floor, and they decided to change the layout in that. So they wanted everything off the floor, so they had me bring these home. But I still have my deer heads. I think I have 68 deer heads hanging in Jay's right now. But anyway, I got a skunk mounted because I trapped that skunk, and nobody ever gets a skunk mounted, and I thought it was just really unique. It had a lot of white in the tail, and so I got that skunk mounted, and the woman that mounted it, she wasn't real happy with me because she actually, when it thawed out, she had it in her house, and she was going to skin it, and that didn't work too well. The house smelled like skunk for a long time. As soon as it thawed out, she took it outside and actually skinned it. But that's coyote, bobcat. I called in the bobcat. Shot the coyote with a bow. I've shot quite a few coyotes with my bow, and shot the fox with a bow. And then this here is my workout stuff. I'm 69 years old, so to stay in shape for climbing trees and scouting and busting brush and stuff, you have to work out. If you get a little bit obese, you just can't hunt the way I like to hunt. You got to get back in there in the crap. You got to go where other people aren't really they're not willing to put the work effort to go back in that deep because it requires waders or hip boots or canoe or a boat. So I like to stay in shape. So I got a treadmill, elliptical. I lift free weights, pull downs here, butterflies, and then I also do sit-ups and curls over there. And then over here, these are, because my deer heads, other than I got 5 of my bigger heads here at this house, because I keep all my heads up at Jay's, I put 8x10s of all my kills. So I actually have pictures of all my deer. I actually know people that have some mounted deer that they don't have a picture of themselves with the actual deer. That always puts my mind in question, well, did you actually kill it? Because I've been a scorer with CBM, Commemorative Bucks of Michigan, since 1985. And there's been a few people that have actually bought antlers from people up in the Upper Peninsula and got them mounted and claimed that they had them, that they actually shot them. And a couple of those people I was actually talking to at a couple of the shows, and when they were talking about their deer, they didn't have any pictures of them with the kill, which I always think is kind of weird because you always take a picture of yourself with your deer. But anyway, these are some of my deer. I got 50 bucks that are in the record book, 31 in Michigan and 19 from out of state. Let's see, Michigan, Iowa, Illinois Public, Michigan, Missouri, Michigan, Kansas, Michigan. That was my first big buck. That was in 1969, right there. Michigan, Iowa, Michigan, Kansas, Michigan, Ohio, Kansas, Michigan, that big 14 points, Michigan. This was a state record from Michigan in 1981. Picture of me with a pike, and then there's a bunch more down there. Most of those down there are from Michigan. These here at the time, I don't know the year that picture was taken, but those were the 3 state records in Michigan. And this one here, these are mine and his are no longer the state records. This is still the state record in Michigan. It was 238 non-typical. There's a story behind that, but I'm not going to say it. And we can show you the rest of them from the other side. On the fishing side, these are some of my tackle boxes. The other side of this pool table is the same way, and on the back side as well. Tackle boxes go all the way around the outside, so if I'm going bass fishing or walleye fishing or whatever fishing I'm going to do, I just grab whatever specific tackle boxes are for that type species of fish or panfish or whatever. So it just makes it a lot easier when you can just target what you're doing and grab the stuff and go. You don't have to mess around with everything and change stuff up. And this one's kind of interesting here, this pheasant. My wife wanted a pheasant mounted, and I don't bird hunt. I suck with a shotgun. So I had a chance to hit that pheasant with my vehicle, and I did, and I ended up getting it mounted. And I did, because I didn't mess it up too bad. I actually went over it and I broke its neck, and didn't break its neck. I broke one of its wings, and it was running up and down the fence row, and I had to actually chase it down and catch it and kill it. It took about 20 minutes, but it couldn't fly. And I played tennis. I played tennis in school and golf in school, so those are some tennis rackets. But here are some of the other pictures from the other side. These are some of my earlier deer. Like that one there is from the 70s. That one's from the 70s. That one over there is from the 70s. That one up there is from the early 70s. That's the 70s. That's 1975. I don't know if you can see that 10-point there. So these are some of my older ones. And then there's a couple bigger ones here. These are, 140-ish deer here. But anyway, and then this is another one. This one was from Starved Rock. And I would still be hunting that location because back when I was hunting that in 2007, 8, and 9, there was this monster field, and it was tall weeds. There was a field that they burn it every 7 years. So the years it was like 4, 5, and 6, and 7, the weeds were, they were 10 to 15 feet tall. They were extremely tall, and they were really dense. And I was hunting in an oak, but there was a locust tree 17 yards from the oak where I was hunting. And I always waited until December, because I typically, when I go out of state, it's during Michigan's gun season, because I don't gun hunt. And I suffer in Michigan with all the other bow hunters. I preach hunting pressured property, and everything I do is public and knock on doors for free permission. No food plots, no leases, none of that stuff. Never paid a dime to hunt any place. So anyway, when I went to Illinois on that Starved Rock property, that weed field was really tall, and then after the 3 years that I hunted it, they burn it out. And then they just let it go into CRP. So that tree wasn't any good anymore, because now the weeds are like, waist high at the highest. It's just basic CRP weeds. So deer don't bed in it, because if they stood up, they would immediately be vulnerable. So anyway, when I was hunting that, I would always call the park ranger. Usually it was right after their gun season ended in December. I'd call the park ranger if I seen that they were going to get some snow. And I would confirm that the park ranger, did you guys get that snow that I saw in the weather forecast? And he would say yes. And I said, how much? Usually it was 6 to 8 inches is what I liked. So then I knew when I was going to go down there and scout, I was looking at fresh sign that was made within the last 24 hours. So everything was going to be fresh, which is, they're still going to be on their same, in late December, it's going to be primarily bedding to feeding. So this locust tree, it was just all churned up underneath it the first year that I hunted there in 2007. And there was an oak right next to it, 17 yards, and I prepped that tree, and I shot that 9-point in 2007 on the very first evening hunt from that tree. And then in 2008, with a 40-pound bow, because I had right shoulder surgery done, I had Matthews make me a 40-pound bow. I shot that big 12-point, which that's actually the 12-point. The 9-point's on the other side. But they were both in the snow. And both of them were shot on the very first evening hunt with that fresh snow. And that worked out great. I think we're going to go upstairs now and look at the other deer. We'll look at the ones downstairs first in the living room. Okay, so this buck here was a buck from Michigan I shot on October 1st, 2014, and it's really rare to kill a buck early season in Michigan, because usually I'm hunting on property where there's a lot of other people hunting, and even though I do all my scouting during postseason, So I'm not interrupting anything. I can go in and rape it with as many visits as I want because spooking deer is irrelevant. Most of the other guys that are hunting the same properties I'm hunting are the public lands. They're doing all their stuff preseason. So it's pretty rare if there's a buck like that, it's not already nocturnal before season opens because of the other hunters' preseason scouting and location preparation. But anyway, I shot that one in the morning, about 8:15 on October 1st, and that's a 154. And then this one here is from Kansas, and that's a 9-point. And I actually passed that buck up the first time. He came in and he was kind of facing me, and when he's facing me, he's not real wide, which as a scorer, I should know width isn't that important. You know, tine height is way more important than width, because width is one measurement, tines you get measurements off each tine. But anyway, I passed him up, and then as he turned and he was walking away, straight away, I was like, damn, that buck's over 150 inches, and I just let him walk. And I'm not gonna take a walking away shot. So I hunted that same spot. It was at a primary scrape area, and I shot him in the very next sit. And that's a really unique buck. We'll actually, as we're going up the stairs, we'll take a little side shot of him because you're going to be right next to him. You can barely see that little kicker coming out the base. Those two bucks, the one in the middle and the one on the far side, are both public land Michigan bucks. And that is the most massive antlered buck I think I've ever seen. That was an 8.5-year-old buck. And again, public land. So this one here was the state record for 5 years. That was 1981. This one was 1983. And then that real wide one, that one was from Missouri, and that was in 2004. Really interesting story. These were both shot in a cattail marsh. The two Michigan bucks were back on the little island in a cattail marsh. I had to wear waders to access it, which is typical for Michigan. You got to go through the crap. You got to go back where you got to pretend everybody's trying to kill you. So you got to go places where you feel like you could get up and move during daylight hours without getting shot. And that's the type of areas I shot both of these. But this one was kind of unique. That was Missouri, and I'd never hunted in Missouri before, and I was going to go by myself. So I called the county seat, because this is back before Onyx. And I called the county seat, and when I'm talking to the people, anytime I was talking to anybody, you know, the girl at the gas station, when I was talking to the girls when I'm ordering plat books, which was the county seat, I would ask them, do you by any chance know anybody that would let somebody bow hunt, any farmers or anything? Because they see farmers all the time working at the county seat. And this one girl from this one county said, yeah, I do. I know this guy, and he owns quite a lot of land, and he lets people hunt. So she gave me his number, and I called him, and he owned like 3,000 acres. But I was going to go out there during the Missouri gun season, but I was going to be bow hunting because that's the only time I had to go. So I called the guy, and he said, you know what? I've got 40 acres that I won't let anybody go in that 40. I'll let you hunt that 40. So nobody's going to be in there gun hunting before you get there. And so I get there, and it was all bedding area surrounded by ag. It was just awesome. And it was surrounded by two sides were picked corn. One side was standing corn, and the other side was picked beans. So anyway, I butted that buck up when I was in there the first day scouting and prepping a couple locations, and he was with a doe. And I watched him run across a picked cornfield, and I was just waiting because he was headed towards this fence row. And I was just waiting to hear a shot, because again, it's gun season, and I didn't hear anything. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. Nobody shot. So I prepped a couple trees, and I hunted in the rain all day, daylight till dark, for 3 days in a row. And then on the fourth morning, and I'm tired, because every time I'd get back to the hotel at night, I had to wash my exterior rain suit, because I was not wearing Scentlock as my exterior, because Scentlock did not make a good waterproof suit at the time. So I'm not getting to bed till like 11:30, and I'm getting up at 3. So by the fourth morning, after sitting all day 3 days in a row, I was tired, and I hit the snooze 3 times. And finally, something inside me said, John, you're here to hunt. You're not going to kill anything laying in bed. And it's 3 a.m. Well, 3:30 now, because I hit snooze 3 times. So I got up, and then I shot that buck that morning after 3 grueling days, but I had sleep deprivation really, really bad. but it was worth it. And this is my new Eberhart's Signature Saddle. You're actually the first ones getting a look at this, and I may get in it later today. It's a 2-panel system, so you got an inner and an outer panel, so you can adjust the. In my opinion, a 2-panel system blows away any single panels, any single seats, because you've got the versatility of making your seat as deep as you want. You can overlap them and have a 6-inch seat. You can have an 18-inch seat. You can have a 12-inch seat. So for newbies, the Signature Saddle is awesome because you can widen the seat to make you feel comfortable because you've got more coverage over your butt or into your lower back. But as you hunt more out of a saddle, you will tend to want a narrower seat, just cupping your butt as you get comfortable sitting in one. So with this, you can have that. You can go 6-inch, 8-inch, 9-inch, whatever you want. And another unique thing about this is all other single panel saddles have fabric, some form of fabric bridge, which is this here, and they also have fabric bridge loops, which are like this. This one's a lineman loop, but most other saddles have a fabric bridge loop as well. So you got fabric onto fabric where your bridge is attached to the loop. So once you're sitting in it, that kind of locks into place. As soon as you sit in it, the one will cup, the bridge loop will cup around your bridge strap or rope. And and it'll stay in that position. It doesn't automatically adjust to your weight when if you move anything around. The cool thing about this has smooth aluminum D-rings, and see how easy that slides in there? So whenever you adjust the seat, if you shallow the seat up or you widen the seat up, as soon as you put in this automatically moves to wherever it is to center your weight adjustment in the saddle. So you've got the total adjustability of the saddle itself, and you also have something where you never have to worry about the saddle riding up, because with single panel saddles, that's a huge issue. You're always lifting your weight up and pulling it back under your butt. So with this, you don't have to, because the inner panel, this one's under your butt, this stays under your butt all the time. The only one that you ever move is this outer panel. Well, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity of showing you my crib. I'm a little old school, but the crib sounds kind of cool, and I appreciate you coming. I do have to work today, so hope all of you viewers have a good season this year. Okay, this here is a 14 point that I shot in 1997, and I did a podcast with Mark Kenyon 2 weeks ago, and we actually talked about this because one of his hypothetical questions was, would you stay in a stand if you had somebody walk by you, or would that ruin your hunt and you'd get down and move elsewhere? Well, that happened on this hunt. I was in this tree between 2 bedding areas. It was a pinch point. There were scrapes at this spot. And at 10:30 in the morning, we had a little skiff of snow, maybe 2 inches. I had a guy walk right underneath my tree. And I kind of looked down at him, and I said something to him real quietly, and because this is just a 20-acre parcel. I said, "Hey," and he looked up, and I said, "I don't think you're supposed to be here," because there was 2 other guys that had permission on this 20, and he wasn't one of them. I knew him. And I said, "I'd appreciate it if you leave." And he had on a red plaid shirt, and he had on blue jeans, and he was carrying a vertical bow compound. So he exited out one of my shooting lanes. My shooting lanes are relatively wide. They're about 5 yards wide. And he had on leather boots, which is something that I definitely noticed. So I knew wherever he put his foot down, he was leaving some semblance of an odor, because leather boots have seams, and your odor gets out your seams on leather or Cordura boots. So I'm sitting there, and it really never entered my mind to move because this was such a good spot, and I did actually expect my shot opportunity to be in that shooting lane. That's the main spot where the deer crossed from one bedding area to the other, is through that lane. So I said, well, if something comes through, I'll just have to make sure I stop it before it crosses where that guy's footprints were. And sure as hell, it was straight up noon. The snow had melted by now. So the snow that had fell at like 10 o'clock and that guy walked through the snow at 10:30, that snow had melted. And this buck, he came out of one bedding area and he was coming up through the timber, up the ridge kind of, and I could see it was the shooter buck that I had been looking for. I had seen him one other time on a rain hunt, a day that I sat all day in the rain. I saw him just before dark. So anyway, I got prepped, and when his nose, just as soon as his nose broke the edge of that shooting lane, I came to full draw. And then as soon as his chest was exposed, which would have meant his nose still was not far enough forward to cut that guy's tracks or to smell it, I took that shot. I did just a vocal doe blat, and then he stopped, and I shot him in the chest, and it was just a super nice 14-point older buck. I never really had it aged. I think it's 7 or 8.5 years old, but I'd hunted him for 3 seasons, and I can't believe he lived that long. But anyway, he has forked brows, and other than that, he's a typical 12-point. So now we're going to go look at the rest of my deer heads. We're at Jay's Sporting Goods up in Clare, Michigan. I used to be the archery buyer here in the late 70s. It wasn't in this building, it was in a different building. But I have about 68 deer heads hanging in here someplace, and there's kind of scattered. This is one of them, but we're gonna go look at a bunch of other ones up on a wall. Okay, this one's a little out of place. This is a little spike horn. This was the first buck I ever shot with a bow back in the 60s, and back then only about 2% of bow hunters killed a buck with a bow. Now it's about 25 to 30% on average. So it was pretty rare to kill an antlered buck with a bow back then. Not a lot of people bow on it. But everybody, when I got that deer mounted, because I mounted it in the, I think, early 2000s, and when I was putting it up with all my other deer heads here, guys from the archery department came over and they thought I was kind of weird. They said, "Why did you mount that little sucker?" And I told them, I said, I was more excited when I shot that spike horn than any deer on this wall. That's the most excited I've ever been in my life killing a deer, was when I shot that spike, because it was so rare, and obviously I was young, and it was a big, big deal. Okay, so that buck up there, that 12-point, that's the one where Jake worked at Starved Rock. I shot him on my very first evening hunt in mid-December, right after gun season. Had snow on the ground. Very first evening hunt that time. And then this one right up here in the middle, that's a 180-incher, and that one I shot in Iowa. And on that one was an interesting story. I actually said this on a podcast. I can't remember whose podcast it was, but that buck, I had been hunting. I was on an all-day sit. I was down in this big hole down by a river, big flat down in a river flat. And it was going to be an all-day sit, and I was sitting in the morning with a decoy out. And I wasn't really seeing much. I saw a decent buck at a distance, but other than that, I wasn't seeing much else. But I was seeing a lot of deer about 200 to 250 yards away in a different direction. So at about 10 o'clock, I decided to get down and make a move. So I took my steps out as I was going down the tree. I packed up the decoy and left it there for my exit when I left, because I wasn't going to take the decoy with me. And I just slowly freelanced back closer to where I'd seen all that deer traffic earlier in the morning. And I found a scrape area from hell. I mean, there was 4 big scrapes. One scrape had been urinated in not too awful long ago. It still had a wet spot in it. And it had 2 big clumps of deer droppings, and they were clumped together, which is typically a buck, and also the droppings in the clumps were really, really big. So I prepped a tree, got up in the tree. I was probably in the tree at around 2 o'clock, somewhere in here, and I started seeing deer right away. And then this buck here, that big 12-point, came in, and he came in at what I thought was about 40 yards, and he came in so fast I didn't have an opportunity to actually range find him. And he wasn't coming into the scrapes. He was actually circling downwind of the scrapes. So I drew my bow back. I thought he was about 40 yards away, so I put my 35-yard pin on him, and I don't shoot a real flat shooting bow. It's about 240 feet per second. So I put my 35-yard pin and held it a little bit high, and when I let the arrow go, I hit exactly where I aimed. I shot right between the top of the lungs and the bottom of the spine. So I knew I didn't kill the deer. I felt like cutting my lead strap and just committing suicide and falling out of the tree. But I'm like, you know what? I saw a decent buck in the morning, maybe he'll come by, you know, because this is obviously the main primary scrape in this area. Well, when I shot this buck, the arrow passed through, obviously, and he ran about 80 yards and went into some really heavy junk. I'd say half an hour, 40 minutes before dark, I decided to do a rattle sequence. And so I took my bag out and did a sequence, and from right where that big buck went in the brush, another deer came out, a big buck came out. And it never crossed my mind that it could possibly be the same deer. But as it got closer, because he was about 80 yards when he came out of there, as he got closer, I was like, man, that frame looks exactly like the one I shot a couple hours ago. And when he got about 30 yards away, and he's making a beeline right for the scrapes, which are 12 yards away. When he got about 30 yards, I could see the hole in him. So it was the same exact buck I had shot a couple hours earlier. And then he got to the scrape, he started working the scrape at 12 yards, and I drew back and I shot him at 12 yards, and he ran about 40 yards and fell over within sight. And that was the end of that story. So it was a freelance hunt, but it's the only time in my life I've ever had 2 shots at one deer.